Hello and welcome to Rambling Rogues, a podcast for indie authors. We're finally back. It's been a long while since the last podcast. At the beginning of the year, we said we were going to do these much more regularly, but unfortunately, for various reasons, that hasn't happened. But we are back and we intend to start doing these, touch wood, more regularly. We've actually got a couple already recorded, so there'll be one at least for November and December we can guarantee, and hopefully beyond that as well. The long-awaited AI episode is also on its way. We're very excited finally to get that live. But this particular episode is focusing on horror stories. It's for Halloween, so we've got a couple of authors who are going to be reading short stories for us. We've got Kristopher Cisneros, who's back again, reading Paradise Cemetery. He was on last year's Halloween podcast. And since then, he's expanded the story considerably. So we're really excited for you to hear how that story has grown and where it's gone since then. We've also got Chris Newton, my brother, back again. He's going to be reading a story which will be featured in the Rogue Animal anthology. Now, at this point, you may be wondering where Joe is, who normally does the podcast with me. Unfortunately, Joe and I did record an intro together. Sadly, the audio got corrupted, so I'm having to re-record it. But anyway, without further ado, we're going to jump straight into the first story with Kristopher Cisneros.
Paradise Cemetery is an expansion of a poem that I wrote last year under the same name. When I wrote that original story, I was asked a lot of questions about the characters, events in the stories, things of that nature. So I decided to expand on that universe. And I'm going to read to you the first 3 chapters in the series, which will have a total of 10. And here we go. Chapter 1. Welcome to Paradise. The house was a Grand Victorian, and it's where this eerie tale begins. My father took a job, you see, as the caretaker of Paradise Cemetery. My name is Sabrina Malone, and I live above a funeral home. No sisters, no brothers. It's only me, with mother and father, a family of 3. I'm the daughter of a mortician, that strange, creepy girl no one dares to befriend. It's my house where folks come to say goodbye to their loved ones who've crossed over to the other side. We left Maine on a sun-baked day, bound for a town by a Californian bay. 2 days we traveled, weary and worn, to the land of sunshine, surf, and Hollywood lore. I had just turned 14, and life was in full sheen, an adolescent summer hue, a freshman's path to a brand new school. We passed a sign that read, "Welcome to Paradise," and a smile crossed my lips. It was a new chapter of my life. But then the sky grew dark and cracked with thunder. Lightning tore through, splitting the heavens asunder. The endless road was finally behind, and we had made it to the town where shadows danced and secrets hide. Through twisted lanes and streets of old, we ventured on. Every weary glance a warning, whispers carried on the cold. At the gates of Paradise Cemetery, tall and iron wrought, an old man in a black slicker stood like a sentinel, his presence fraught. With gnarled hands he turned the keys, unlocking tales untold. The gates cracked open, bitter winds howled, secrets unfold. As we drove past, his eyes met mine, gray orbs like the storm untamed. So dark and blank, they seemed to slow time, putting me into their claim. Perhaps I was being a bit dramatic. I do have that flair, which is why I've always been the outcast, a stranger everywhere. Father turned the key. The lock groaned and yielded with strain. The front door swung wide to deathly still air, and silence filled the domain. A musty scent, like old memories, clung to us in the gloom. We stood at the threshold, a somber tableau of our new home. "Not so bad," father declared, with forced cheer in his tone. Hands clasped in anticipation, he ventured in alone. "Come now," he beckoned, his excitement undaunted, but mother's eyes flickered with fear, her faith quietly haunted. Hand in hand we stepped into the shadows deep, mother whispering prayers in the silence we keep. I felt father's thrill in the gloom and decay, but mother's trembling hand spoke of the price we'd pay. We'd just begun to unpack our things when father answered a first call. The reaper respects no time, he comes for one and all. Any hour, night or day, weekends, events, even holidays. Sometimes he shows mercy, gives time for goodbyes, for final words, apologies, and teary eyes. Other times he's in a bad mood and takes a multitude of souls in an act of moral turpitude. The reaper must have seen us coming and begun his work, heart-stopping. I asked father if I could go along on this call to the home of a man, a poor soul named Paul. He said yes, but I would have to wait in the hearse once we arrived at the house of Paul Wirtz. The rain fell harder as we set on our way, thunder booming across creation, not a very good day. The Wirtz family waited for us outside in the rain. Despite the angry sky, there they remained. Their clothes looked as if from another age, and each stood perfectly still, faces locked in a strange gaze. Father parked the hearse and grabbed the stretcher. The Wirtz family pointed towards the house all together. The rain fell in sheets, covering the streets, and found a rhythm with my heartbeat. Some time later, father emerged, with the body of Mr. Wirtz, life all purged. Together, we placed him into the hearse, a quiet procession, no better, no worse. Father spoke to a tall man, who nodded in reply, showing no emotion for the one who had died. He got back into the hearse and we drove away in the storm. Glancing back, my heart snagged on a feeling which was hard to ignore. A girl stood there, about my age, staring at me and smiling so carefree. Her blonde hair was matted and covered her face, but I could see that the smile she had was so out of place. A shiver ran up my spine, goosebumps climbed my arms. All I wanted was to leave, to escape the storm. As we passed under the gates of Paradise Cemetery, lightning flashed across the tombs, scary. Mother opened the garage doors, and father backed the hearse inside. We struggled to shut the doors up again as the winds fought from outside. Father put Mr. Wirtz into the cooler and said he'd work on him later. I hurried upstairs to watch the storm's dark descent, but as I opened the door, I was met by a strange presence. The wind howled inside, stinging rain lashed throughout. My boxes were scattered, my things thrown about. The shutters had flung open, the latch broken wide. I stood wet and cold with nowhere to hide. Using the leg of one of my jeans, I secured the latch tight. The winds died down, but something wasn't right. A flirt and a flutter broke the calm air. I turned slowly, caught in a wary stare. A black crow perched upon my bedpost high, having burst through the open window to escape the dreadful sky. He was as dark as the bleak December, and soaked from beak to tail feather. Seeing him brought to mind only dreadful things, devils, ghosts, goblins, and dragons' wings, nightmares, curses, omens, and all manners of bad things. My legs urged me to run, but I stood still. I didn't know what this dark bird might will. Was he friend or foe? I hadn't a clue. But in that moment, I feared what he might do. The storm pounded at my window with all of its might, and the crow let out a desperate cry. I noticed one of his wings was hurt, and felt a pang for the poor little bird. I gulped and edged along the wall. as he let out another painful call. He shook his plumes as I fetched a towel from the bathroom. The bird's call grew louder still. I whispered to calm him, hoping my parents wouldn't hear his shrill. He winced as I patted him dry, and by whom I was still mystified. I heard my parents coming up the stairs and down the hall, so I tucked the bird under my bed beside some dolls. They burst into my room, inquiring about the ruckus. I told them that the wind had turned my room into a psycho circus. They told me to clean up and get ready for bed. I smiled wide, nodding my head. Once they left, I tended to my uninvited guest, making him a nest of old shirts and socks to give him some rest. I fell into a deep, needed slumber, and dreamed a dream steeped in horror. I was chased throughout the Victorian by an unseen force. With my voice stolen, I couldn't cry out for help, of course. I dashed up the stairs to the attic door, that lurking presence I could not ignore. I twisted the knob, but it wouldn't turn, and in my despair, I felt my tears burn. I threw myself against the door until it gave, and stumbled inside too frightened to be brave. The attic was cold, and the darkness crept near, as rain beat the roof and thunder roared clear. I cowered in the corner, trembling and frail, when a whispering voice pierced through the gale. "The Reaper has returned," she breathed in my ear, her words entwined with the tune of the storm, chilling and clear. I whipped around just as the lightning flashed, but she vanished in seconds fast. Yet my mind caught a glimpse, a few vivid details. The ghost was a girl like me, with long flowing hair. Thunder struck close, shaking the walls, as the Reaper swept in, answering death's call. He raised his sickle, the end drawing near, but I woke to a crow's call, and he disappeared. The storm had passed with the night, and morning's golden light blinded my eyes, harsh and bright. The crow perched upon my chest. He was no dream but real, so I reached out to pet him, testing his feel. The dream's fearful grip refused to let go, but I found some solace besides my crow. Strangely, his presence made me feel sound, a guardian angel I had somehow found. A slight rapping came at my bedroom door. "Yes," I answered, "this and nothing more." "Honey, can you help me clean downstairs?" Mother asked. "I'll be down in a moment," I answered fast. "Thank you," she replied, then left. So I sat up, and the crow, he hopped back to his nest. His breakfast wasn't fancy, just a treat in disguise. I placed some candy in his nest, certain he wouldn't criticize. I opened the shutters wide to a foggy autumn morning, and spotted a figure out there walking. Strolling among the tombstones was the old man, with a shovel in his right hand. He planted that shovel into the ground, took a drink from a flask, and looked around. He spotted me up in my room, peering down with curiosity, and his grim face looked up, meeting my gaze with a chilling intensity. I retreated in and closed the shutters again. There came the voice of my mother. "Sabrina, are you getting ready up there?" "I am," I answered her. I told Father about the man in the graveyard. He told me that his name was Bernard. Digging the graves, mowing the grass, and working on the cars were all part of his repertoire. I had only Pop-Tarts for breakfast, sweet but light. And then I got to work, tidying up the new office site. Mother vacuumed the chapel and polished the pews, and I dusted the selection room. It took a lot of elbow grease to get everything nice and clean. There was dirt and grime all over and in between. When we were done, the funeral home looked good, and it put us all in a nice mood. Father received his first shipment of caskets and urns, and while he looked them over, I went up to check on my bird. Edgar, that's what I named him, was out on the windowsill, cawing and moving his tail. However, he couldn't fly away. His broken wing meant he'd have to stay. The doorbell rang, and I peered down from the window at the Wirtz clan. The sun was bright, and its light filtered into the funeral home, but uncannily, darkness seemed to follow the Wirtz family. I couldn't see their faces, though I did try. The house just seemed darker, as they sat quietly like wax figures in the parlor. I stretched my neck out like a condemned man hanging from the gallows, trying to see through the shadows. Mother placed her hand on my shoulder, startling me so that I lost my composure. "Sabrina, what are you doing?" I answered her with the truth. "Spying." "Well, stop it," she scolded. "Why don't you go out and do something more productive?" It wasn't a bad idea that Mother had. I decided to explore the graveyard firsthand. I donned my Bauhaus t-shirt, cut up jeans, and Doc Martens, venturing out to scope the scene, eager for new enchantments. Paradise Cemetery was vast, a sprawling memorial park. Navigating it would be quite the trek, but I was ready to embark. I wish Edgar would have come along, but he had to stay. Still, I ventured out into the bright of day. The cemetery was like the moon of Endor, with huge trees everywhere. A lot of the markers dated well over 100 years ago, back to Pilgrim days, I'm guessing, I don't know. I strolled around for hours and picked a lot of wild flowers. I had a conversation with Bernard, who sat under a tree with his old dog. He wasn't scary or wicked, and took the time to speak with this kid. Bernard had worked at Paradise Cemetery for 30 years, through seasons of sorrow and fleeting cheers. He shared that once all around was farmland as far as the eye can see. Now it's a cemetery, a place where only time and memories be. "I've dug graves for most of those folks," he told me with a sigh. "What happens after Mr. Death pays his visit? That's a question none can reply." Bernard returned to his work, his dog following him, paused, shot me a lazy bark. I thought, well, whatever, and continued my grim adventure. I explored the old mausoleum. The tombs inside, I really wanted to see them. The bodies sealed in walls and urns filled with cremains, but the doors were locked with heavy chains. Deciding to head home as the sun went down, I was startled by a sound, a noise that told me I was not alone on this hallowed ground. From the corner of my eye I did see a shadowy figure duck behind the tombstones. Crazy. A growl came from the trees above, so I started to creep away. I'd had enough. I broke into a run and yelled out Bernard's name, but that was in vain. I spun back toward the trees, just as a hairy beast leapt out at me. This terrifying event was most unforeseen, and in response I let out a powerful scream, believing this was the end of my youthful dream, and I had just turned 14. Chapter 2. The Wolf Boy. I tumbled down the hill, tossed off my feet. Grappling with this creature I struggled to beat. His claws raked at me, though, to my surprise, not a scratch appeared. Something wasn't right, I realized. His growls and snarls were more clumsy than grim. The whole encounter seemed absurdly dim. A sharp knee strike right where it hurt the most revealed no monster, no specter, no ghost. A boy in a filthy wolf onesie lay curled, howling now as if stung by the world. "You've ruined my shirt," I shouted lividly. "Sorry," he whimpered, weak and timidly. "Why did you attack me like that?" "Because I'm a werewolf," he spat. "You're no wolf," I said, quite sure. "Am too," he retorted, wounded and sore. "It hurts," he moaned, clutching his side. "Well, it serves you right for those tricks you tried." He snarled, reaching to paw my face, then staggered up, hobbling toward the gate. He climbed over, swift and spry, and vanished into the weeds nearby. I sighed, looking over my torn, stained shirt. That wolf boy, truly the worst. By the time I stumbled through the door, the Wirtz family was gone, and Father was away at the morgue. "What happened to you?" Mother asked when she beheld my muck-covered clothes. "I was attacked by a wild thing," I muttered, heading upstairs to check on the crow. The weekend came, and business was brisk. Edgar had grown in strength, ready to fly to take that risk. His wounds had healed. Soon he'd leave the nest. Having him around was strange, to say the least. Saturday evening, we said our goodbyes, as he was ready to head out to that moonlit sky. I tossed him out, and off he flew, circling the house not once but twice, and away over paradise. I watched him soar above the trees, a part of me aching as he flew free. Tears brimmed, and I swallowed my sob. Then Mother called me down to see her latest job. In her office, she proudly showed her plan. A website she built, Mother, the tech-savvy woman. We prepared for Mr. Paul Wirth's end, dressing him in a new suit, candles lit to attend. Few arrived as per Wirth's final decree, for Paul had lived a life quite sternly, you see. He ruled his home with an iron hand, keeping his kin on a tight command. So confessed the tall man. I passed out prayer cards while Mother and Father took their post as ushers, solemn and proper. In the lounge, I made coffee, lost in thought, when suddenly a figure startled me on the spot. It was Mr. Wirtz's granddaughter, all dressed in blue. I asked, how do you do? She merely shrugged, silent and still, her presence alone giving me a chill. I'm sorry about your grandfather, I softly said. He was mean, I'm glad he's dead. Her voice so cold it froze the air. I backed away, uneasy, from her empty stare. Don't be afraid, I won't hurt you, she said, calm as could be. My name is Annabel Lee. I'm Sabrina, I replied, unsure of this girl. She raised a brow and asked, ever seen a real-life skull? I could tell that Annabel was strange, but not someone from whom I'd need to estrange. In fact, I found myself liking her well. We were both a little odd, as you can tell. I led her upstairs to where Edgar had been. She found a feather and took it, her eyes full of sin. Did you know that crows are into necrophilia? She said with a grin. I nearly choked on my soda pop right then. Yeah, apparently they really love the dead. I shook my head at what she had said. You're making it up, Annabel, I blurted out. And she fired back. Google it, if you have doubts. She peeked through the window, her eyes gleaming bright. Her smile grew wide at the sight of the tombs in the night. I love the dark, she said with a spin. You live in the Reaper's playground, brings shivers to my skin. Father texted. The service was about to begin. I told Annabel, and with her fingers she played a tiny violin. In the hallway, Father spoke with the pastor, who, pale as a corpse, looked like a cadaver. Annabel skipped past them and down the hall, acting like a real goofball. Yet, as she entered the chapel's dark veil, her antics vanished, replaced by a pale, cold stare. I really liked that girl. A new friend so true. A kindred spirit, who knew? I'd never made friends so easily before. Now in paradise, I'd met Annabel and Edgar the Crow. The rain returned the next day, much to my dismay. Mother and I set up the flowers at the grave, and both got drenched as if hit by a wave. After the old man was laid to rest, Annabel Lee approached me. In a long black coat she was dressed. Isn't the gloom just splendid? She asked, a very strange thing. But I couldn't tell if she were acting or if it all truly came from within. I'm escaping this rain, I said, heading for the porch. As I did, I glimpsed the wolf boy, hiding under the old mausoleum's arch. Annabel, too, sought refuge from the dreary weather. From her pocket she pulled out Edgar's feather. Who's the boy in the wolf suit? I asked her. She peered through the downpour, spotting him ducking behind a grave marker. That's Nicodemus. But most call him Demas, she explained, then added, I think he's a bit slow in the brain. He attacked me yesterday afternoon, I said. He knocked me down and pawed at my head. Demas was bitten by a rabid dog last year, and now he thinks he's a werewolf, she sneered. The tall man pointed at us, and Annabel's demeanor grew quite serious. I've got to go. Maybe I'll see you at school, she said, then ran off, but suddenly halted instead. Hey, I'll meet you at the front gates, and we could walk together." "Sure, depends on the weather." She laughed and said, "See you in the morning." The wolf boy remained silently lurking. He made a pawing gesture in my direction, then vanished into an area of the cemetery known as Resurrection. He seemed unfazed by the torrential monsoon. Perhaps he was all warm and toasty in his wolf costume. I finally got around to setting up my room, laboring away in the afternoon gloom. My walls adorned with the posters of my favorite bands: Depeche Mode, Susie and the Banshee, The Cure, Duran Duran. I filled the shelf space with skulls and plastic bones, Jack and Sally plushies, and tombstones of foam. Black sheets covered my bed, and I hung curtains of deep purple, while figures of Freddy, Michael, Jason, and Gremlin stood in a circle. I picked out an outfit for my Paradise High debut. My stomach fluttered with butterflies, it's true. I dreaded the moment I'd be put on the spot, introduced as the new kid, my forethought. As I lay upon the midnight dreary, I heard a sound faint and eerie. There came a tapping, soft and slow. What it might be I did not know. I jumped out of bed and crept to the window, peered into the dark to see Edgar the crow. He had returned, his silhouette stark, outlined in the flashes of thunder's arc. I opened the window and let him inside, gave him a hug. "Where did you hide?" He flapped his wings, shaking off the rain. Together at last, we were whole again. The bitter winds carried a girl's terrified screams. I was wide awake, this was no dream. Edgar cawed and flapped his wings as the ghostly girl wailed and screamed. The sound came from the attic above. I stood like stone, my face drained of blood. Thunder boomed, shaking the walls. Then silence fell, but no peace at all. I turned to Edgar, my heart gripped by terror. I yearned for the light of morning, when my door flung open without warning. In flashes of lightning, I saw a specter most frightening, her mouth a gaping maw, and where there should be eyes, I saw none at all. I grew disoriented, my world turned to blur, my mind disconnected, and the last thing I heard... Chapter 3. Dead Girl Blues. My eyes opened slow, and there on the floor I lay face to face with the crow. I sat up, but a dizzy spell dropped me onto the bed, a pounding headache, wishing I were dead. I took a deep breath, trying to regain my composure, as Edgar perched himself on my shoulder. "What happened last night?" I asked of the bird. The memory of something grim, something absurd. A girl with hollow, empty eyes, and a heart-stopping cry. A pale face, both haunting and sad, shattering my sense of reality like broken glass. Mother called to me from down below. "Ugh, I need to get ready for school," I told the crow. It was hard to focus on my first day of school, with an attic haunted by a ghostly girl ghoul. I came down the stairs in my goth clothes, hair dyed black. When Mother saw me, she nearly had a heart attack. "I thought this was just a phase," she huffed. My only response was, "What?" A bit about who inspired my look. I became a fan of Elvira after reading her book. Then I fell down the rabbit hole, found Lydia Lynch, Vampira, Betty Page, and all the other women society found strange. To me, they were beautiful, creative, strong, impulsive, unapologetically expressive. Everything I wanted to be myself. At least that's how I felt. Mother rolled her eyes as she served me breakfast, adding, "Why do you love being the outcast?" "I like the way I look," I said, biting down on bacon. Father walked in, kissed my forehead, and said, "Amen." "You're supposed to be on my side," Mother snapped. "I think she's very Lydia Dietz," Father cracked. I yawned wide, rubbing my eyes with balled fists, while Mother shook her head at all of this. "Were you up late last night, Sabrina?" Mother asked, her displeasure hard to mask. "I think that our attic is haunted," I replied. "Maybe it's where someone died." This is what happens when you watch all those horror movies, Mother sighed. You start to believe in all those messed up stories. But I'm telling you the truth, I blurted out. There's a ghost up there, I asserted without doubt. A little help here, Mother said to Father. Well, what does the ghost look like, Princess? He asked with wonder. Don't encourage her, Mother protested. Father smiled and nodded, playing the jester. There's no such things as ghosts, Princess, he said, though I found that hard to believe, being surrounded by the dead. I'll grab my purse and take you to school, Mother offered, but I told her she needn't bother. I'm walking to school with Annabel Lee, I said with a touch of glee. The granddaughter of Mr. Wertz, Father asked, surprised, shocked to see me, an introvert, so socialized. I walked down the winding path in the fog and came across Bernie with his old dog. Morning there, Sabrina, he shouted with a wave. The dog barked as I strolled through the graves. As I waved back at Bernie, he called, Have a nice day at school, girlie. Annabel Lee waited by the cemetery gates. We gotta hurry. It's only 15 till 8. She loudly popped a bubblegum bubble, then stomped through a puddle with no trouble. Her blonde hair was a tangled mess, and her clothes were nothing short of distress. I could tell she didn't care at all. Kicking a pile of dead leaves, she said, Boy, do I love the fall. I had to admire that, I must say, to be so carefree and gay. As we wandered the next few blocks, Annabel Lee spun tales of paradise that left me shocked. This town surely has skeletons in its closet. In every house lurks a kook, eccentric, or zealot. But of all the tales Annabel Lee told me, the one that struck me the most was of a girl named Carrie. Her murder unleashed a string of killings in the 30s, leaving this town haunted by nearly a century's worth of worries. The unsolved murder of that poor girl froze my blood and undid my nerves. Then I blurted out, Do you believe in ghosts? I swallowed hard and added, Because there's one in my attic of a girl. Annabel Lee paused, her face growing grim. She cracked her knuckles and gave a slight grin. Ghosts are real, that much I know, she whispered. But why is one haunting you, though? The chill in the morning air seemed colder somehow. As the fog thickened, I furrowed my brow. I don't know why she's chosen me, I replied, but she's up there haunting steadily. Then I heard Edgar's sharp call. Our eyes drew up at the sound of his call. Crows are omens, Annabel Lee said. They're spirits of the tormented dead. That's Edgar, my crow, I said to her, and he's not at all bad, I'd have you know. Annabel Lee replied with a dismissive giggle, Whatever, and skipped up the steep hill. Besides, Edgar scared away the ghost from last night, I added. I passed out from the fright. I just know what I know, Annabel Lee said, about the spirit world and the crows. Tell me more about the spirit in your attic, she asked. Is she all gross and demonic? Well, she's terrifying, no doubt, but the more I reflect, there's something tragic in her that I didn't expect. I guess there is no fun in being dead, especially at such a young age, Annabel Lee said. The end of all your youthful days. I suppose you're right, but what is she doing up there? I rhetorically asked, besides giving me a good scare. Well, why don't we ask her? Annabel Lee shouted with glee, then stopped in her tracks, adding, It'll be easy. When school lets out, I'll go home and grab my Ouija board. We'll ask the question she cannot ignore. Does that really work? I asked, believing those things were just a joke. Sure it will. Ouija boards are the key to open the door, Annabel Lee swore. I agreed. To our odd meeting indeed. But first, I had to survive the day. At Paradise High, I took a deep breath and assured myself it would be okay. I stood at the gates of Paradise High, feeling like I just might die. The building loomed with Gothic spires, casting shadows like funeral pyres. "Here's the golden rule," Annabel Lee began. "Find the cool kids and stay away from them, understand?" She patted my back and smiled wickedly, leaving me with a bad feeling. "Not so bad, right?" I shrugged, stomach tight. I swallowed hard and slowly passed through the cold steel doors and down the crowded halls. The halls, buzzing and loud, but I felt distant from the crowd. Fluorescent lights flickered, casting a glow, like a morgue, cold and hollow. Whispers floated as we passed by, about the mortician's daughter and why. I was used to the looks they gave, living so close to the grave. As Annabel Lee led me to the office door, someone popped out, making my heart soar. It was that wolf boy Nicodemus. He pawed at my face and fled, loud and raucous. Annabel Lee just laughed. "He's a strange one, no doubt." But my nerves rattled as insecurity crept out. "Don't let him bother you," she said with a grin. "All bark, no bite. It's just how he's been." In homeroom, Miss Galloway scanned the room, her gaze sharp as roses bloomed. "You'll sit by Nicodemus," she said with a smile. Not him again, that wannabe wolf child. He growled low as I took my seat, snapping his teeth with feral heat. I merely turned away, trying to ignore, for who knew what horrors this day had in store. At lunch, Annabel Lee and I sat beneath a twisted tree, its gnarled branches swaying in the breeze. Edgar perched on a branch and watched us eat, as a little tune chimed in from the street. The melody twisted with the rustling leaves. "It's Buddy!" Annabel Lee cried, rising with ease. "He's got the best treats, none can compare." She rushed toward the truck with a joyful air. An ice cream truck paused with a cheerful sound as everyone raced to gather round. "Strawberry swirl or chocolate delight," Annabel Lee laughed. "I could eat them all night." "Well, now, I haven't seen you before," Buddy said with a grin, handing me a cone, his voice low and thin. "I don't have any money," I replied with a frown. He boomed a laugh which echoed through town. "Don't worry about that," Buddy said, wiping tears. "This one's on the house. Eat it in good cheer." "Thank you, sir," I said, beaming from ear to ear, and he replied, "Don't mention it, my dear." "New in town, are you?" he asked, his curiosity sharpening, my warm feeling darkening. "Yes, just arrived about a week ago," I answered as a sharp call sounded from the crow. Buddy's gaze shifted to Edgar perched near. "Nasty little buggers," he sneered. His smile twisted, eyes filled with rage, like a wild beast rattling in its cage. His eyes met mine again, and he forced a grin cold as sin. "Ever since I saw the birds, those creatures have unrattled my nerves." He must have noticed my unease. "Fly away, little bee," he teased. "Go on now, back to your hive." Another strange encounter in paradise. I told Annabel Lee about what happened with Buddy, but she was too distracted, muttering, "That's lovely," Googling what questions to ask a ghost as we prepared for tonight's episode. Annabel Lee leaned in, her eyes agleam. "Tonight, Sabrina, will summon the spooky which haunts your dreams. With my Ouija board, we'll call the dead girl and unlock the secrets which keep her bound to our world." I wasn't sure if I should be thrilled or scared, but deep down I felt I was unprepared. The dead girl was pretty scary looking and might not like what we were planning on doing. Gym was last period, and the long day was causing me bouts of delirium. The gym teacher had us walk around in a track, like zombies on the attack. On my second lap, a group closed in tight, surrounding me beneath the autumn light. "So, I hear your father's the new mortician in town," a pretty girl asked, her hair golden brown. "Yes," I replied, this and nothing more. She smiled and said, "I'm Lenore. My daddy's the mayor, and I'm head cheerleader. She spoke with a tone like she thought herself superior. That's nice, I muttered, unsure what to think. Should I like her or follow my instincts? What's your name? She asked, her voice dripping with disdain. Sabrina, I answered, trying to stay sane. Okay, she giggled, and her entourage joined in, all tickled. Well, Sabrina, do you like sleeping with the dead? Lenore asked, laughing and bowing her head. It's not too bad, I said. I guess it just depends. On what? Asked Lenore. On the mood that the dead are in, for sure. Sometimes they come into my room begging for favors, I said, stepping closer, like scaring cheerleaders whose daddy are mayor. Lenore nodded and gave me a shove. You're a weirdo, like that Works girl, aren't you, love? Well, from now on, we're gonna call you Zombina, the group laughed, like a pack of wild hyenas. Zombina, the girl who sleeps with the dead. Lenore and her squad shoved past, leaving me to wonder if this day would ever end. Annabel Lee and I parted ways. She turned toward her home, and I ventured alone beneath the clouds, gray as tombstones. As I neared Paradise Cemetery, Edgar called from above. At the end of the block, I saw it, the ice cream truck. Its motor hummed quietly, but its presence unnerved me. All I could see of Buddy was his arm in the breeze, waving me over, but I froze, weak in the knees. The iron gates creaked open wide as Bernard's old truck rolled in from the side. Sabrina, welcome home, he called with cheer. The ice cream truck backed away, leaving me with fear. I rushed inside the Victorian up to my room, still shaken from my brush with the looming doom. My phone buzzed, and I jumped in fright. It was Annabel Lee, talking about what we had planned for tonight. The lights were off, only candles lit the board. The world of the dead we were about to explore. Downstairs, my parents were busy embalming, unaware of the dark mysteries we were summoning upstairs. Place your fingers on the planchet, Annabel Lee whispered. On the what? I asked her. This thing, she snapped, holding the pointer as she laughed. We both shared in the humor, and then settled in to talk with the dead girl. Annabel Lee took a deep breath and asked aloud, Are you here with us? But there was nothing announced. Your board has the Milton Bradley logo on it, I said, and added, I think this is all bullsh. Then I felt a presence in the room and caught the scent of rosy perfume. It's okay to speak with us, Annabel Lee said, then added, You don't need to be afraid. The planchet began to move, slow and sure, spelling out the word, Boo! You're playing games, I snapped at Annabel Lee. But she swore that it wasn't her. She was scared. Our fingers were held to the wooden cursor as it spelled out the name of the dead girl. Carrie. Carrie. A cold chill swept through, a breeze so eerie. I can't move my hands, I said, panic settling in. Annabel Lee screamed, her voice full of frantic din. The candles flickered out. The room went black. Tension hung heavy. We were under attack. The walls rattled. The bed began to quake. A loud pap echoed. Then the sleeping dead were wide awake. The windows came open and the curtains billowed. What was happening we did not know. A shrill cry sent us scrambling. We didn't know what strange things were coming. Annabel Lee and I retreated toward the corner. As we looked at the green floating specter, she was floated above the board and then fell and hit the floor. The air became still, but there remained a chill. Annabel Lee and I held on to one another, unsure of the dead girl. We finally dared to crawl closer, fear and wonder pulling us both nearer. I reached out, my fingers brushing her head. She let out a scream so full of dread. Then she collapsed and went silent. I was frightened, but Annabel Lee, she laughed and said, That was trippy.
As well as sharing his fantastic stories with us, Kristopher has also agreed to answer some questions. I began by asking him to tell us a bit more about himself for those that don't know.
Thank you for having me. For those who don't know me, my name is Kristopher Cisneros. I'm a writer with a love for the eerie, the mysterious, and those shadowy edges where reality blends with the unknown.
Since we last saw Paradise Cemetery, the story has grown quite considerably, with the most obvious change being a new main character, Sabrina Malone, who replaces Sloane. I asked Kristopher what prompted this change, as well as the significance of death within the story.
Paradise Cemetery has definitely evolved since the first version. Originally, it was shorter, more straightforward Halloween poem, meant to capture the spooky gothic vibe in a bite-sized way. But as I continued to explore the story, I realized there was so much more potential to deep dive into Sabrina's world and the town's dark history. The idea of Paradise Cemetery became richer, growing into a whole haunted town that feels lost in time, with layers of mystery and secrets hiding in every corner. Sabrina became a character with her own struggles and relationships, and now she's discovering that there's a darker force lurking in Paradise, one tied to her own family and their role as caretakers of the cemetery. Since last Halloween, I've really leaned into the eerie, Burton-esque town and expanded the cast of characters, like Edgar the Crow, Demas the Wolf Boy, and Buddy the Ice Cream Man, each bringing something unique and strange to the town. It's transformed from a simple Halloween story to a more dark coming-of-age tale about friendship, facing fears, and uncovering the mysteries that shape us. Switching the main character from Sloane to Sabrina actually came from a desire to create a character who felt more in tune with the story's expanding gothic and whimsical atmosphere. Sabrina's name has this old world, almost magical quality that felt right for the tone of Paradise Cemetery. It adds to the mystery and makes her feel like she could belong in this eerie, lost in time setting. As I developed the story, I realized I wanted a protagonist who was a bit of an outsider, someone who could bring curiosity and a bit of sass to her strange new world. Sabrina, in this new kid in town, which adds layers to a story as she's not only learning about the town's supernatural side, but also has to navigate school and deal with quirky residents. She has an edge that feels right for the story, and that shift has helped me to develop the world around her in a way that feels rich and more layered. My experience working in a mortuary has profoundly influenced my storytelling, especially in Paradise Cemetery. Being surrounded by themes of life, death, and everything in between gives me a unique perspective on the fragile existence and the rich narratives that come within it. In Paradise Cemetery, death isn't just a backdrop, it's woven into the fabric of the story. The characters' interactions with the supernatural elements reflect my understanding of how people process grief, loss, and the unknown. I think my work allows me to approach these themes with a level of authenticity that resonates with readers. It also gives me a chance to explore how the living interact with the dead and what they learn from them, the secrets they keep, and how the past influences the present. In a way, the mortuary serves as a bridge between my experiences and my creativity, allowing me to tell stories that are both haunting and potent. It shapes the atmosphere, the characters' motivations, and ultimately the messages I want to convey about life and death. Sabrina's character is inspired by my own fascination with film and pop culture, particularly the ways they portray death in the supernatural. Growing up watching Hammer and Tim Burton films, along with the shows that explored the macabre, I always found a certain beauty in the darkness. Sabrina embodies that curiosity and fascination with death, which allows her to engage with the world around her in a unique way. Her interest in the tombs and the mysteries that they hold reflects a blend of youthful curiosity and the yearning for connection to something greater. I wanted her to be a character who isn't afraid to explore the unknown, much like how many of us are drawn to ghost stories, horror films, and gothic narratives. This not only makes her relatable, but it also sets her on a path of self-discovery and adventure as she begins to unravel the secrets of Paradise Cemetery. Sabrina's journey represents a deeper understanding of life and death, showing that our interest in the macabre can lead to meaningful connections and insights. Her character serves as a bridge between the living and the dead, allowing readers to explore those themes in a way that's both engaging and thought-provoking.
It's clear from reading Paradise Cemetery and Christopher's other stories that he has a deep love for pop culture and film. I asked him more about this influence and how it impacts his work.
My love of film and pop culture is a significant influence on my writing. Movies like Star Wars and Phantasm, along with the works of Edgar Allan Poe and Hammer films, have shaped my storytelling style and thematic choices. I find that films offer a vivid way to explore more complex ideas such as life, death, and the supernatural, which resonates deeply within me. Incorporating these references into my story allows me to create a rich tapestry that invokes nostalgia while also connecting the contemporary themes. They serve not only as inspiration but also as a way to engage readers who share similar interests. By weaving in elements from beloved films and classic literature, I can tap into a shared cultural experience that enhances the emotional impact of the narrative. Moreover, this approach allows for a playful dialogue with the audience, inviting them to recognize and appreciate the nuances of these influences, whether it's a nod to a classic horror film or a subtle reference to a literary great. I aim to create a layered experience that resonates on multiple levels, making the story feel familiar yet fresh. If you want to explore the rest of Paradise Cemetery and see how the story unfolds, you can check out Maze Publishing. I will provide the link to Rogue Animal. They have a fantastic selection of works, including mine. You can find more information and read the full story at Maze Publishing. I hope readers enjoy the journey through Sabrina's world as much as I enjoyed writing it.
And if you would like to read more of Paradise Cemetery, you can find a link within the description. Now let's move on to Christopher's second story, Midnight, the Stars, and You.
Midnight, the Stars, and You by Kristopher Cisneros. I hadn't wanted to go to the dance, but against my gut, I gave it a chance. Dressed to the nines, I hailed a cab. Thought I'd let loose, give fun a stab. The fading hours of 1928, and I was feeling far from great. Had me a strange rendezvous with the boss, Bug-Eyed Lou. Working as a killer, being a hired gun had lost its thriller. My victims' faces, pale and stark, followed me like shadows in the dark. My cabbie was a chatty old soul who drove the streets of Chi-Town like the wind out of control. He told me his name was Karan, with a grin so sly. Said he had an affair till I hailed him this night. He spoke of the writers he ferried around town, each story tragic, and wanted to know my own. I told him to shut up and drive, and leave me to the night. We pulled up to the Hotel Ritz. I made my exit, fixing my mitts. He turned to me, his chin unshaved, a beard that hung clean depraved. "Coins for the dead," he softly said. I paused, confused. "I'm sorry," I pled. "For the ferry," his voice dim. I tossed him the bills, glad to be rid of him. I strolled into the Grand Hotel lobby. The Charleston boomed. What a roaring party. Checked my coat, removed my top hat, slicked my jet black hair right back. From atop the stairs I took it in. Showgirls, jazz bands, millionaires, all with a grin. The place had it all, a swell affair, but something in the air felt less than fair. The chandelier sparkled high above, casting a golden glow, lighting up the joint like $1,000,000. Hard to believe Prohibition was in full show. Dames in gowns like fairy tale queens, and fellas in tuxedos sharp and clean. I sauntered over to the bar, gave it a bang. "Hey, Mac," I called to the barkeep with a devilish twang. "Pour me a drink, strong and sour. Let's get me drunk for the midnight hour." At the end of the bar, she caught my eye. A real beauty in red, I must testify. Her gaze locked mine. Like the sunset, I strolled over and offered her a cigarette. She took the gasper, fingers pale. A smile played on her lips like a whispered tale. "Thanks," she said, voice low. "I was needing a smoke, you know." I struck a match. The flame did flicker. Her smile curled, but stayed bitter. "The name's Giuseppe," I said with ease. "And you, doll, who might you be?" "Fania, but you can call me Fanny," she said. "Everyone else does, Daddy." She was a dream that couldn't linger too long, the kind you woke from wanting more. I asked, "So you here alone or what?" She nodded, her head bowed, a flapper's cut. "I just finished dancing just now," she replied, then smirked and said, "You look like a gangster," and continued to hide. I chuckled. "Funny, Fanny, you're quite the riot, and I love it." I signaled the barkeep to bring over more drinks, then leaned in and said, "Truth is, I was a gangster, a real lunatic." "Was?" she queried, sipping her rum and coke. "I told the boss I was out of the game," I spoke. He wasn't too happy about it, tried to have me rubbed out. I paused, added, "I left that joint like a battleground, no doubt." I didn't understand why I was so loose with my lips, but there was something keen about this kid. Her aura, as they say, was bright, lighting up the room with an angelic light. "So what's your claim to fame, doll? You look like a silver screen star." Fanny blushed. She said she was a vaudevillian, and just like that, I was bitten by the love bug, no kidding. "So how's about a dance?" She smirked, eyes gleaming. "You sure got a lot of class." "Hey, I ain't no Bill Shakespeare. You want to dance or what? I got the keenest dish in the joint right here," I said, made her blush on the spot. She swallowed her drink and jumped to her happy feet, did Fanny, and said, "Let's swing, Daddy." I took her hand, led her to the center of the dance floor, and let me tell you, we tore it up, by George, what a roar. The 12-piece band broke into a raucous shim, sham, shimmy, and I moved Fanny around the dance floor until I had her shouting, "Kiss me!" Hands clapped, the hounds let out a whistle. It was some kind of thrill, loud as a pistol. Fanny fell into my arms, breathing coming fast and heavy. "That was fun," she whispered, soft and heady. "Well, ain't you sweet?" I grinned, feeling sly, as we stood there face to face, eye to eye. I leaned in closer, ready to steal a kiss. A voice behind me said, "Well, ain't this rich?" I froze, turned around slow, my heart giving a pound. And there he stood, Nicky the Knife Lavakili. I thought he had drowned. I hadn't seen Nicky in what felt like years, and seeing him now stirred up my old fears. He smirked, eyes hollow, skin pale and thin, like he'd been to hell and back and wasn't quite in. "Nicky, is that you?" I muttered, feeling the blood drain from my face, trying my best to keep steady, to hold on to my grace. "That's right. It's Nicky from the old neighborhood." He grinned wide, eyes sliding to Fanny. "Now introduce me to the dish. Don't be rude." Fanny stuck out her hand, and Nicky took it, kissed it, still playing the ladies' man. "What's wrong, Joey? You look like someone just walked over your grave." He slapped my back, chuckling, then glanced around. "This sure is some place." "What are you doing here?" I asked, eyes fixed on Nicky. He nodded, just stared, his gaze icy and lowy. His head swayed side to side with the beat, but not a word, his lips sealed tight, not a peep. "You two old friends?" Fanny asked, breaking the uncomfortable silence fast. "Well," I started, but Nicky cut me off with a sneer. "Yeah, we go way back, me and this bum right here." "It's been a real long time, ain't it, Joey?" I gulped, adjusting my collar, feeling edgy. "A real long time," I muttered back, a whirlwind of thoughts spinning me off track. "You like my new shoes, Joey?" he cracked. "They ain't like my last pair, the ones cement wrapped." His laughter boomed, filling the crowded room. The years did nothing to soften this goon. "It was nice seeing you again, Nicky," I gulped. "But I gotta go. I'm spending New Year's with this girl, you know." "Oh, well, don't mind me," he said, flashing that wicked grin. "I'm just gonna play the room, take in all the delights within." Nicky kissed Fanny's hand once more, then vanished into the crowd like a ghost through a door. "See you next year," he tossed over his shoulder, leaving me rattled, my blood running colder. "Are all your friends so strange?" Fanny asked with a giggle. I nodded, muttering "kinda" as I led her to the table in the middle. No sooner had we sat down when the waiter brought us a bottle on ice, much to my surprise. "I didn't order this," I barked at the waiter. But he just smiled and said, "It's on the house, sir," as he poured the liquor. "Tonight, everything's on the house," he remarked with a bow. But something in his eyes made Fanny turn away and frown. "White wine, my favorite," I said, taking a sip, though something strange lingered in the air, tugging at my grip. I couldn't deny it, though. I was having a hell of a time. The band played "You're the Cream in My Coffee." The night was in its prime. Fanny just tapped her fingers along the table. But something about her seemed less stable. She wasn't laughing or smiling, just staring into space, like the joy had drained from her face. "What gives, babe?" I leaned in to ask, feeling the shift. She sipped the wine and whispered low, "Nothing, just enjoying the gift." But there was something cold in her tone, like she wasn't really there, like I was alone. "We can blow this joint, find a better place to ring in the new year, just you, me, and the saints." She cracked a smile, then said, "We can't." Her voice haunted and distant. I blinked, confused, trying to grasp her reply. But before I could dig deeper, someone caught my eye. Out of my past, stepping into the here and now, came a figure that made my heart pound, and how. His name was Enzo Rossi, one of the original Mustache Pete's, always bossy. What the hell was going on? Was this some kind of a joke? "I thought that was you, Giuseppe," he spoke. "Mr. Rossi," I blabbered, my mind in a fog, unable to piece it together. Something felt wrong. I stood up and shook his hand and gave him the respect he demands. "Please, Mr. Rossi, won't you join us?" I squeaked and pulled out a chair for the boss. Enzo nodded and took a seat. To Fanny he smiled grandfatherly. I couldn't keep my eyes off Mr. Rossi. The fact that he was here just seemed too strange to me. "Tell me, Giuseppe, how's the trade?" he asked, his voice a measured gauge. "I was in, but now I'm done," I answered low, my heart a drum. "I told Bug-Eyed Lou today that I was walking away from the game." "Lou's a hothead, always rash, never one to make a plan last," Rossi said as he lit his cigar, a flicker of fire. "He pushes things too far, too dire." "Yes, Mr. Rossi, it got real nasty. The place was left looking like a catastrophe." Fanny stared at me, her eyes gone wide, yet not a word from her lips inside. "If you don't mind my asking, Mr. Rossi, how is it that you're here, plain as could be?" I gulped as the question slipped past my tongue, but I had to know what was going on. "You died 5 years ago. I went to your funeral," I said, dropping my tough guy show. "You always were a stand-up guy, just like your old man," he replied as he reached for Fanny's hand. "It would be an honor if you'd dance with me. You don't mind, do you, Giuseppe?" Fanny nodded, and with Rossi she glided away. I watched them both. Fanny moved with grace on display. First Nicky, now Mr. Rossi. The spirits were playing, toying with me. I glanced at my watch. The midnight hour was creeping near. Another year of my life about to disappear. The band struck up a slow, haunting waltz, and I sat there lost in a haze of tangled thoughts. Faces blurred as I scanned the crowd, until in a flash the truth hit me loud. These faces, I knew them, each and every one, victims of the life I lived with my gun. The gambler who owed Lou big money sat sipping whiskey, his smile anything but funny. The Costa brothers, who made a play for Lou's turf, were laughing it up with dames in fur. The crooked cop who took our bribes was popping champagne soaked in delight. Some of Dean O'Banion's boys, who died in a hail of lead, now the life of the party, dancing with the dead. And as the hair on the back of my neck stood tall, I realized I was among them all. Mr. Rossi and Fanny returned, noticing my face, pale and concerned. "You're right, kid?" Mr. Rossi asked. I nodded, but my disbelief couldn't be masked. "Well, I'll leave you two alone. There are others I need to speak to, so many ghosts." Mr. Rossi kissed Fanny's cheek and shot me a glance so cold, so bleak. "You're right, Giuseppe?" Fanny asked, her voice shaded with a hint of worry. "No, I'm not all right, Fanny," I whispered. "This place is pure misery." "Oh? And what makes you say that?" I hesitated, feeling the weight of the past. "A lot of these folks, they're from my life. Some I gunned down, some killed with a knife." "We need to get out of here now," I urged Fanny, but she wouldn't go. "The year's about to change. We gotta remain," she said, her voice strained. I took a firm hold of her hand and forced her to stand. "I'm flying this coop," I buzzed. "If I were you, I'd leave these ghostly spooks." "Good grief," she replied, trembling like a leaf. "Look, I know we don't know each other well, but believe me, we're in danger," I warned her, my voice low. "Okay, Giuseppe, we'll go." I guided her through the raving crowd toward the door. Just as we neared the exit, a group of thugs appeared, blocking the way. The mugs were like nasty hellhounds, holding Tommy guns aimed and ready to fire their rounds. "If you leave now, you'll regret it, kid," Nicky's voice chilling our departure he forbid. We ran for the other exit, but that too was useless. At every turn we were blocked. "Time's almost up," Nicky shouted, pointing at the clock. "You were a stand-up guy, just like your old man. That was until his brains got bashed in by Bugs Moran," Mr. Rossi said as he descended the stairs. "And you shot me dead, thinking I played a hand in the affair." He blew smoke into my eyes and grinned so wide. "It was you and your old man who crossed me. But you forgot. No one outsmarts Mr. Rossi." "You're not leaving, Giuseppe. The party's just begun." Rossi laughed and yanked Fanny from my grasp. "Leave her alone," I growled. "Let her go." He scoffed and turned to Fanny. "Tell this sap what he needs to know." Fanny slowly strode back to me, a smile plastered on her face, the life of this party. "You don't know me, but you knew my husband, Carl Applebaum. He was one of those you planted in the ground." "Yeah, he worked for Arnold Rothstein," I whimpered, backing away from the girl. "I ended my life when I learned of his murder, and now I'm cursed to this hotel forever." The band began to play "Midnight, the Stars and You," and Fanny took my hands, whispering, "Now you're trapped here too." The crowd closed in as we started to dance. The truth sank in. There'd be no second chance. I hadn't survived that meeting with Bug-Eyed Lou, I'm afraid, and now I'm trapped in 1928. The countdown began. 10, 9, 8, 7. What a sham. 6, 5, 4, 3. My life of sin had caught up with me. 2, 1. I was done. Happy New Year.
Midnight, the Stars and You is an intriguing story. I asked Kristopher about the inspirations behind it.
It's a story that started with my fascination for the 1920s, a time that seemed equal parts glamorous and dangerous, full of jazz, prohibition, and a cultural pulse that was all about defying the rules. I wanted to explore the darker side of that era, especially through the eyes of a character who lived with the weight of his choices and his past. The inspiration also came from the timeless, haunted elegance of songs like Midnight, the Stars and You, which became the soundtrack for this tale, both nostalgic and haunting, as if the song itself held a secret or a curse.
Alongside Kristopher's rogue animal anthology story, Blood Red, Midnight, the Stars and You is the second story we've seen from Kristopher that focuses on crime, albeit from a very different angle. I asked Kristopher if this was a genre that he had a particular interest in. I also asked him about telling a story from the perspective of an ex-mobster and how he felt about getting into the headspace of this character.
Crime is a genre I'm really drawn to, especially because it reveals so much about human nature, the motivations, the desperation, and the fine line between right and wrong. But for me, it's always been less about the crime itself and more about the people who are involved, the weight of their choices, and the impact on their lives and souls. With Blood Red, I explored the brutality and rawness of crime from a grittier, more grounded perspective. Midnight the Stars and You took a different approach, blending the crime element with a supernatural twist, creating a sense of punishment and karma that follows the protagonist beyond death. I love exploring how crime as a theme can intersect with horror, the supernatural, or the gothic, and it lets me drive into a darker, more poetic side of storytelling, where morality is fluid and ghosts of the past are more than just memories. Getting into the headspace of an ex-mobster is all about understanding the combination of loyalty, regret, and survival, the instincts that define him. I started by imagining his life experiences, the tough, gritty environment that shaped him, and his moral compass, which is likely skewed from years of making morally dubious choices for the sake of loyalty or power. I wanted him to feel like a classic noir character, but with a sense of vulnerability. He's tough on the outside, used to hiding his emotions and doing what needs to be done. But there's a layer of guilt and fear that sweeps through, especially as he realizes he's not in control of this situation. To build that voice, I think about how he sees the world, a bit cynical, quick with quips, but also haunted by the things he's done. The idea that he's trapped at this ghostly party with the very people he wronged adds a haunting vulnerability. It's like he's in a personal purgatory, and letting that sense of dread slip into his thoughts and dialogue really helped me capture his headspace.
One of the most captivating things about this story is how it sets the scene of a 1920s setting. I asked Kristopher if he'd done any research to achieve this.
I did some research to capture the 1920s setting accurately, especially since the era was such a distinctive atmosphere and language. I drove into details about Prohibition-era Chicago, focusing on the jazz clubs, the underground world of speakeasies, and the types of characters that would populate those places. I also read about real-life gangsters, their interactions, and their slang, which was crucial for adding authenticity to the dialogue and the story's tone. Even smaller details, like what a ballroom would have looked like, or how people were dressed, sharp tuxedos, flapper dresses, were important in establishing that visual mood. I wanted the audience to feel like they were stepping into a smoky room lit by chandeliers, filled with people who looked like they walked out of a noir film. It was all about immersing readers in the world of this ghostly New Year's Eve party, making the era feel alive, so that the supernatural twist felt grounded, yet surreal.
Both this story and Paradise Cemetery contain two very similar elements, a rhyming scheme and the theme of death. I asked Kristopher about the inspiration behind both of these.
The rhyming scheme in both Midnight the Stars and You and Paradise Cemetery felt like a natural fit for the themes and moods I wanted to create. Rhyming brings a certain rhythm and musicality to the storytelling, almost like a dark lullaby that pulls readers in and immerses them in the eerie, almost dreamlike atmospheres of each story. It's an older style that pairs well with the 1920s setting in Midnight, The Stars and You, and the gothic haunting tone of Paradise Cemetery. This kind of rhythmic storytelling has a way of making the narrative feel timeless, like it's being retold as a legend or a ghost story. As for the theme of death, yes, that was definitely intended from the beginning. I wanted both stories to explore the afterlife and the lingering impact of their lives and unfinished business that extended beyond the grave. In Midnight the Stars and You, it's about a character facing the consequences of his past sins in a kind of twisted, eternal party. In Paradise Cemetery, death is present in a different way, woven into the cemetery setting and the mysterious town, but also revealing itself as a force the characters have to confront and understand. So from the onset, I wanted death to play a central role, not just as an end, but as a doorway to other secrets and mysteries.
Lastly, I asked Kristopher if he had any upcoming projects we should look out for.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm excited to share that I have a few upcoming projects. One of them is Blood Red, my werewolf story, which will be featured on Rogue Animal anthology. Definitely keep an eye out for that. Additionally, listeners can enjoy my story, The Mystery of Emma Villanueva, and Wilhelm's Frightening Tales podcast. I will provide that link as well. Of course, I'd also love to remind everyone about Paradise Cemetery, which you can read in full at Maze Publishing. Lastly, I've completed the Hallelujah Traveling Show, which I'm currently pitching to various podcasts. I can't wait for everyone to experience these stories.
Thank you so much for your time, Kristopher, and for sharing those brilliant stories with us. Lastly, we're going to play for you the latest addition to the Rogue Animal anthology, which is a story called From House to House by Chris Newton.
From house to house. Deep beneath a boulder lay a filed witch called Marjorie, who ran in fields in guise of hare to feast upon the harvest. Her stole in pale she enchanted to waddle as a goose, and walk beside her up the lane that none might know the truth. The farmer paid no heed as milk trickled from its bill. Meg took it home to Cuckoo Hall, and there she drank her fill. But the farmer was a wily fox who caught her in his barn one night. He counted 6 great sacks of grain where once there had been 5. He took his pitchfork, gave a poke, the witch she was revealed, and walked thereafter with a limp, her fork wound never healed. The farmer's fate was worse, much worse, that harvest was his last. His cows were dry, his crops all died, his chickens not one egg they laid. He died alone in poverty, and cursed the hag unto his grave. But mortal men have not the power to work their will with words, and there are things that foolish men oft fail to observe. There is magic in the changing season, magic in the earth. A cunning witch, she walks betwixt the power of these worlds. So when the trees are ripe with fruit, and when the wheat grows tall, be mindful that you thank the witch that lives in Cuckoo Hall. And when you bring your harvest in, take heed and have a care. It is wise to let the local witch take her rightful share. They called her the Woodplumpton Witch because she was buried in that parish, in that village. But make no mistake, Marjorie Hilton was from Singleton. For much of her life she was the Singleton Witch. As a child, I took these stories to be about a wicked old crone, a mischievous hag, a thief who stole milk and grain. It never occurred to me that she was simply hungry, and went from house to house, asking for food. But then, I didn't believe in witches. I didn't believe in Halloween either. I knew it happened once a year, like Christmas and Easter. I knew that kids dressed up and went trick-or-treating, but that was just an American thing. I didn't think it was important. I can't tell you how many times I'd been to the Teenlow shopping centre in Polton without giving a second thought to its name. It was just a name, like Hounds Hill or Amounderness Way. But names are more than just words. They're stories. It was sometime in the 90s. I was in the now semi-mythical Cobweb Records at the Teenlow Centre, as I was most Saturdays back then, taking my son James to buy the latest Oasis single, that it occurred to me to ask the man behind the counter why the shopping centre had such an unusual name. He told me that when it had first opened in 1973, there'd been a competition to name it, and a pupil from Hodgson School had chosen the name Teenlow and won. I asked him what the pupil's name was. He laughed and said, why did it matter? I told him it didn't, and I meant it. I'd been a pupil at Hodgson around that time, and I wondered if I knew them, that was all. Though I didn't remember any competition. It must have been a good 10 years later when I saw her face. Alice Radcliffe. Even when you're in your 40s, the people you went to school with must still be referred to by their full names. I don't make the rules. We ran into each other right here in the lobby at the Grand Theatre, purely by chance. We went for a drink in town afterwards and talked about the old days. The teachers we hated, the pranks, the angst, the melodrama. We talked about music, about coach trips from the old bus station on Talbot Road down to Nebworth. Me, too drunk and too tired to find my coach home, deciding to sleep on the grass and worry about it in the morning. Alice dragging me to my feet and all but carrying me onto the coach home. Buying LPs from Cobweb Records as teenagers, and then with our own children when they were teenagers. We reminisced about the mania when Be Here Now was released on the 21st of August 1997, pre-ordering our copies weeks in advance. God, what a shop that was. It's a chemist now. The whole place has changed. It's gone all posh. There's a booths. Remember it in the old days when it was all done up for Christmas. It was something else, properly magical. I was down a rabbit hole of nostalgia, but I had noticed a slight change in Alice's expression. I worried I'd said something that had upset her. If I didn't know better, I'd say she'd looked uncomfortable ever since I said the word Teenlow. I should have left it, but I was curious. Do you remember something about a competition, I asked, to name the shopping centre? Apparently it was someone from our school in the 70s, but I don't remember. It was me, said Alice. I chose the name. A strange silence fell, a deafening silence. Why? I asked. She shuffled uncomfortably in her seat. Her reply took me by surprise. She said, "So that people don't forget." We didn't speak about it again for a long time, but we kept in touch. We met up again a couple of weeks later, and then drinks became meals, and meals became pub lunches on Sunday afternoons, and pub lunches became weekends away in Windermere. And before I knew it, I was unofficially living at her place in Carlton, near the cemetery. It wasn't until the dark evenings drew in, and the leaves were beginning to fall on a wet and wild-filed night, very much like tonight, when she next mentioned the word Teenlow. I came home to find a carved pumpkin resting on our doorstep, and a bowl of sweets by the door in the porch. Alice was in the kitchen, placing apples into a large bowl filled with water. There were various lanterns about the house, with tea lights flickering within each one. I was surprised that she had gone to such effort. Her daughter had grown up and gone off to uni. There was nobody to be doing this for. We had never bothered with Halloween in my family. It was an American thing. I told her as much, and she laughed. But there was something in her eyes, something behind the laughter. She looked at me directly and unblinkingly and told me that Halloween was not a holiday. It was a celebration of the dead. It was a ritual to be observed. She lit another tea light, placed it in a hollowed turnip, and then carried it through to the living room, placing it almost reverentially by the fireplace. The way she handled the lantern, the way she placed the apples in the bowl reminded me of the way religious people behaved in churches. She arranged the Halloween sweets in their bowl as if they were offerings. I asked her again about the word Teenlow and what she had meant when she said that people should not forget. Through the drizzle on the window pane, I could see that the sky outside was a deep black now, and the October wind moaned down the chimney breast and echoed in the grate. "I'm going to tell you something that happened to me as a teenager," she said, "and you won't believe me. Nobody ever has. So I'm not going to expect you to believe it, but I ask you to respect the fact that I believe this, because it happened to me." And she told me about when she lived with her mum and dad and her younger brother Carl in Singleton, in one of those houses opposite St. Anne's Church. She told me about the cold, crisp autumn night when she had sat reading her Misty Annual and there came a knock at the door. Her father had answered, and Alice had peered over his shoulder to see a small, hunched old woman on the doorstep, looking like something from another time in her ragged black shawl and wild white hair. She overheard the old woman asking her father if he could spare a loaf of bread, or a pint of milk for a poor old spinster, or perhaps a few pounds so that she might buy her own food. Alice's father, who did not believe in handouts, told her in no uncertain terms what he thought of begging. If people were hungry, well, there were charities for that sort of thing. He worked hard to provide for his family. He was a self-made man. He ran a local construction firm which he had built up from scratch. He paid his taxes. If other folk were too bone-idle to work, well, that wasn't his responsibility, was it? The old woman's face was impassive, unreadable. She simply stood for a moment, and then, at length, spoke slowly. "I will ask you 3 times, and 3 times only. This is the first." And with that, she turned and was away up the lane. Alice did not know what possessed her, but she found herself tearing up the stairs and into her bedroom to look out of her big bay window and watch the old woman as she shuffled away, walking slowly and with an odd, halting gait. She crossed the road and limped into the woods beside the church, and was soon lost amongst the bare grey branches. Alice shuddered. Something about the woman's words had chilled her, although her father dismissed the old beggar as senile. The following day, he was in hospital with a suspected heart attack. Alice came home from school to blue flashing lights, just as her father was being carried into the ambulance on a stretcher. Her mother had found him collapsed in the kitchen. Alice's own heartbeat quickened in her chest as she watched them drive him away. When they were allowed to visit him at Blackpool Victoria Hospital, the doctor told them it had been a mild heart attack, and he was expected to make a full recovery. Yet still, Alice was afraid. They kept him in for the rest of the week, and Alice's mother tried to remain cheerful and optimistic for the sake of the children. She just about managed it too, until the upstairs bathroom sprung a leak and water soaked through the kitchen ceiling, ruining the plaster and the paintwork on the laminate floor. And by the time a fierce October wind disturbed several slates from their roof, which shattered in the backyard, her reserves of cheerful optimism were spent. In between the scaffolding and the roofers and the plumbers and her father's discharge from hospital, Alice had all but forgotten the old beggar woman. That was, of course, until she returned. October was rolling on, and it was the evening of the 20th that once more there came a rapping at their door. "I thought I told you." Her father was apoplectic. Really, it was no good for a man in his condition. But the woman on the doorstep repeated her plea. A loaf of bread, a pint of milk, or perhaps a few pounds for a poor old spinster. Alice's father threatened to call the police and report the beggar woman for harassment. But calmly, she repeated her promise. "I will ask you 3 times, and 3 times only. This is the second." She turned and limped back towards the woods. Before Alice knew what she was doing, she was rushing out of the house and following the old woman over the road. "Wait!" she called. The woman in black rags stopped and turned. Alice gasped. Her shawl was mottled with moss and covered in fallen leaves. Her fingernails were long, sharpened to points, and encrusted with dirt. "It was you, wasn't it?" Alice whispered, scarcely daring to speak. "My dad's heart attack. The burst pipe, the storm, you—" The word she was looking for seemed almost silly on the tip of her tongue. But when she spoke it aloud, it didn't seem silly at all. It seemed deadly serious. "You cursed us." "I asked him for a simple kindness." She had the oldest voice Alice had ever heard, hoarse and smoky. She sounded like bonfires and dead leaves. Alice wondered how many Halloweens she had seen. His choices are his own. His actions have consequences. I am just a simple beggar woman. She turned away from the girl, passing deeper into the woods. The hem of her black skirt covered her feet, and it almost looked as if she glided across the carpet of brown leaves and the mulch of autumn. Something told Alice it would be unwise to follow. "Please," she called after the woman in black. "What can we do?" The woman did not turn back, but her words echoed about the woods. "Light a teen-low candle and honour the dead." The following night, Alice was woken by her mother's scream. She had looked in on Matthew only to find that the boy was not in his bed. She ran frantically from room to room, tearing back upstairs to check underneath the bed, ransacking the backyard, pulling bicycles from the tool shed, overturning dustbins and barrels, overhauling the sacks of cement and builder's sand in case he was hiding behind them. But the boy was nowhere to be seen. She ran to the phone box in the village. This was before they had their own landline. Yet when she lifted the receiver, instead of a dial tone, she heard only the echo of her own words, the low hiss of static, and a small, terrified voice. "Mummy, I'm scared of the wicked lady." "Matthew," Alice's mother shrieked, "where are you?" But the voice in the receiver would only repeat those words. "I'm scared of the wicked lady." Alice's parents had ransacked the house from top to bottom, from bottom to top, yet still the boy was nowhere to be found. In the village phone box, the handset lay dangling from its cradle, yet still the tiny frightened voice repeated, "I'm scared of the wicked lady." Eventually, Alice's father knocked on next door to wake Phyllis and asked to use her phone to call the police. By the early hours of the morning, the whole street was cordoned off, and there were officers and sniffer dogs combing the area. Once again, the Radcliffe house was bathed in the eerie glow of blue flashing lights. They seemed even eerier in the dark of autumn morning, as if the whole thing was some surreal nightmare from which they could not wake. Eventually they found little Matthew in the woods, sleeping at the foot of an old tree. He was mumbling something about following a witch on a broomstick to a cottage in the woods. Though there were no cottages in these woods. Not any more. The police said that he must have been sleepwalking, and that they should make sure that they kept their front door locked at night. Her father protested that it had been locked, that he always locked it. The chief officer asked if, on this occasion, might he have forgotten, and her father was forced to admit that it was possible. The strangest thing about the whole affair, said Alice, was that when they had found him, he was clutching a bright red apple in his left hand. Her mother had been unable to prise it from his grip, and only when he finally nodded off to sleep did it roll from his palm to reveal deep gouges in its flesh where his nails had pierced the skin. When her mother asked about the issue with the phone, the police officer gave her a sad sort of smile and asked if, perhaps, could she have dreamed that part. The following day she contacted British Telecom. There were no records of any call to or from the village phone box at that time of night. They never spoke about the voice on the phone again, although for many years Alice could not drive past it without shuddering. 10 days later, when everything seemed to have settled down, after all of the horror that October had brought, all they wanted was a nice, normal, uneventful day. But unfortunately, this day in particular happened to be the 31st of October. In Ireland, they had once called it Samhain, a pagan festival syncretized with Christianity as All Hallows' Eve. But here in the Fylde, just across the waters from Dublin, where ancient Celts had once believed that on this night the dead could return to the living, and fairies could cross over from the other world into ours, we called it Teenlay Night. At least we had done, until we forgot. Call it what you will, but the 31st of October is rarely a day on which things are nice, normal, and uneventful. It began typically enough with the Radcliffe family sat around their kitchen table. Alice's mother had made the kids' favourite, egg and soldiers, yet when they cracked the shells of their hard-boiled eggs, the children screamed when crimson blood seeped from within. Mrs. Radcliffe gave a cry of revulsion and hurried to throw them away, but Matthew, in a fit of morbid fascination, had already thrust his fluffy white bread into his egg and held up the bloody soldier curiously. The milk in their tea, which had been delivered fresh to their doorstep that morning, was sour, and the bread in the bread bin was furring with mould. Alice didn't know what a Teenlow lantern was, but she knew that on American TV programs like Charlie Brown, they carved big orange pumpkins and called them jack-o'-lanterns. She had seen some older cottages in the village put hollowed turnip lanterns on their doorsteps at this time of year. There were no pumpkins in the village, so she supposed that a swede or a turnip would do. She found an old book in the library called Halloween and How to Celebrate It, which had been published in 1898 and included ideas for Halloween costumes and games, and amongst them a recipe for something called soul cakes, which were a bit like scones made with currants and spices. She followed the old recipe to the letter, left the soul cakes baking in the oven, and told her mother it was a project for school. Not long after the sun had set and the shadows were lengthening, there came a knock at the door. Children were going from house to house with a ragtag little scarecrow, asking penny for the guy towards their bonfire night celebrations next week. Alice's father slammed the door in their faces before placing a hastily scrawled sign in the porch window: "No begging." It did not deter the next group of children in rubber skeleton masks chorusing, "Trick or treat." Bristling, her father pointed to the sign before slamming the door once more. "What next?" he demanded. "They'll be having Thanksgiving dinner next month, I suppose." The group of children who knocked at their door sometime later were not wearing rubber masks. They weren't wearing masks at all, although presumably they had painted their faces, as they appeared deathly pale with dark, sunken eyes. Their costumes were impressively elaborate, too. They looked Victorian, wrapped up in their layers of flannel petticoats. "Go on, then," Alice's father bellowed. "Say it." But the children did not say trick or treat. Instead, they sang a strange, mournful, oddly tuneless doggerel song. "Soul, soul, a soul cake. Good mistress gears a soul cake. One for Peter, one for Paul, and one for them who made us all." Alice's father peered over their heads and saw adults at the bottom of the lane. They too were in strange period dress, the men in neckerchiefs, the women in crinoline, and they carried instruments. Their faces were blackened with soot, and one of them wore a white sheet and carried a disturbingly realistic horse's skull atop of a pole. "Getting your kids to do your dirty work, are you? Should be ashamed of yourselves. Encouraging begging? Piss off, the lot of you." A discordant concertina struck up by way of response. Alice's father shut the door, but the children's ghostly white faces were still visible, eerily blurred by the glass. Once again they sang, "It's Teenlay night tonight. It's Teenlay night tonight. Give us a candle, give us a light. If you don't, we'll give you a fright. It's Teenlay night tonight." Alice's father slowly pulled the door ajar. "Right, if you lot—" The souling children were gone. But Alice's father was suspicious. He went out to check his van, shining a torch on the tyres to check for nails, making sure his windscreen wipers were intact, checking that nothing unpleasant had been smeared on their windows. Not quite satisfied, he went to inspect the backyard. Perhaps that was their game, distracting you with all that nonsense on the doorstep while some scrote ran round the back to nick his ladders and drills. But his tools were all in the shed, the ladders propped where he had left them against the gate, the sacks of cement and builder's sand stacked neatly against the red brick wall where he had left them. But it was funny, he thought, staring at the sacks. He could have sworn he had only collected 5 bags of cement from the warehouse that afternoon. Yet clearly, in the light of his torch, there were 6. He must have been cracking up, unless it was those bloody kids playing a trick. He took a saw from the shed, poking each of the sacks in turn. He jabbed the first. Nothing. The second, and then the third, and still nothing. He jabbed the fourth, forcefully this time, angry that he had been reduced to this. The paper tore and concrete mix spilled out. He stabbed the 5th. He stabbed the 6th. And the sack screamed. A blood-curdling banshee howl as the paper folded, contorting and distorting until he was looking into the wild eyes of the beggar woman who rose into the air before him, her scream becoming a terrible, mocking cackle. In blind terror, he swung his saw at her. He thought it caught her black rags, but when he looked again, he found his saw had become wrapped in a bath towel, which had been drying on the washing line. There was no old woman. There was nothing in the yard but torn sacks and spilled concrete. He threw the saw to the ground, swore, and stormed back into the house. The uneasy night wore on, and at length there came a slow, steady rapping at their door, not the light tapping accompanied by nervous and excitable chattering of Halloweening children, but an ominous, purposeful knock which seemed to draw in all other sounds and stifle them in its resonance, so that there was only the knocking and the empty night. They knew who it was. This time it was Alice's mother who answered the door, and the witch, for that is what she was, repeated her request. A loaf of bread, a pint of milk, or perhaps a few pounds for a poor old spinster. "What are you?" Alice's mother's voice trembled. The witch ignored her. "I will ask you 3 times, and 3 times only. This is the 3rd. Trick or treat." "That's it," Alice's father thundered. "I'm calling the police." He made to rise from his chair before his wife screamed at him. "Oh, for God's sake, John, shut up!" Alice pushed past her mother so that she stood before the witch. They regarded one another for a second before Alice presented her with a soul cake. "Thank you." The old woman clasped it in her sharpened, dirty nails. She passed it from one hand to the other and then back again. Alice blinked. The cake was gone, like a magician's sleight of hand, yet Alice knew that this was no illusion. Somehow, Alice knew that the cake was gone, just as she knew that it was with somebody who needed it. The Witch of the Woods did not need food, at least not that kind of food, and not any more. "I'll have a word with the milkman," Alice's mother said. "I'll tell him to bring an extra bottle every Wednesday. It'll be on the doorstep, if you need it." The witch nodded and made her way wordlessly back into the woods. Once again, Alice followed her. She didn't know why she did it. She told me it was instinctive, but she seized her turnip lantern from the windowsill and hurried after. "Are you lost?" asked Alice, as the woman in black wandered through the trees. "Well, that depends on where you think I ought to be going," said the witch. "Here." Alice held out the lantern. "To light your way." "Thank you, child." Something which could almost have passed for a smile spread across the old woman's face, and with the teen-low lantern lighting her path, the witch passed into the trees. Alice expected her to disappear into the darkness as she had previously, but ahead a distant light began to glow brilliant orange, growing brighter and brighter until the air was thick with smoke. All about her, Alice saw shapes suddenly visible amongst the branches. People, if that is what they were, in shrouds, their faces pale, their eyes sunken and black, all floating across the fallen leaves as the witch had. The souling children who had appeared at their door were there too, if you could truly call them children. They were too old to be children. The adults with their instruments came too, and the man beneath the sheet carrying the horse's head, all of them floating towards the flames, towards the warmth, towards the light. It's Teenlay night tonight. It's Teenlay night tonight. Give us a candle, give us a light. It's Teenlay night tonight. As suddenly as the fire had burned, it was gone, and Alice was alone in the blackness of the woods. From beyond the tops of the nearest trees, the bell of St. Anne's Church was tolling the midnight hour. And that was her story. I have told it to you as it was told to me. Things didn't last between me and Alice. A few years ago, I found out she'd passed away. So now, each Teenlay night, on the 31st of October, I carve a turnip lantern in memory of Alice and leave it out to light her way, just in case she is lost. Every Halloween I make sure there's a bowl of offerings by the front door, just in case anybody happens to be out in the wild and wet, filed autumn night, going from house to house asking for food. And if somebody knocks on your door this night and asks for a loaf of bread, or a pint of milk, or a handful of confectionery, I think it would be very wise indeed to show kindness. Trick or treat.
Thanks, Chris. That was fantastic. Well, that pretty much wraps it up for this Halloween's podcast. Thanks again to Kristopher Cisneros and to Chris Newton for your time and for sharing those fantastic stories with us. As I mentioned at the start of this podcast, we're going to try and keep a more consistent schedule going forward. So give us a follow on all the different platforms so you can be the first to know when a new episode releases. Just before we finish off, a little bit of housekeeping, I guess. For those wondering about the Rogue Animal anthology, it is still coming, I promise. We're working on it. It's just taken a bit of time. We've had very busy schedules recently, so everything's just been delayed a little bit, but we are absolutely intending to get that ready for the beginning of next year. And all the authors involved in that will receive emails and updates as we get closer to release date. So, thank you to everyone that's listened. We'll see you next time, and happy Halloween.